welcome to Art on the Brain. This is Kelly Drake, and today I'm going to check out this new Daniel Smith black watercolor ground along with the Daniel Smith Luminescent paints called Interference Colors. For those of you who aren't familiar with the absorbent ground or watercolor ground, this is the kind I was used to. It's golden absorbent ground in white, and you use this to create a watercolor paintable surface on anything you want, like wood or glass or plastic, and it turns it into an absorbent surface that you can actually paint with watercolor. This is the black absorbent ground that I got from Daniel Smith, or they call it watercolor ground, and I got it just out of curiosity because I thought it would be fun to do something totally different. And I'm just painting it onto my art journal just for the sake of having something to use as an example. So as you probably realize, you should not use your watercolor brushes for this. It's pretty thick, pasty stuff, and you need a stiffer brush anyway, and I wouldn't want to ruin my watercolor brush with it. So I just use a paintbrush that I got from the paint store. It's like a synthetic brush. And there's a difference between this and the absorbent ground I got from Golden. Golden actually says several thin coats are best, and that will create a more absorbent surface. Whereas this kind, it goes on thick and you probably only need one coat, so that's what I'm trying. They also talk about using a foam roller if you want a smoother surface, but I kind of like the texture that this created with my paintbrush. It actually has kind of a chalkboard paint feel to it. So now I'm just going over it with some of my interference colors to see how they look on the black. And as you see, they show up really nicely. I'm going over it first with a thick coat and then with a thin coat with more water, just so you can see the difference. That first color is Interference Red. The second color is Interference Lilac. This is the Daniel Smith Interference Blue, a thick coat and a thin coat. And this is the Interference Green. So in my former video, when I showed how to use these colors, I show them over other watercolor washes. This is the silver. And I talked about how in traditional watercolor you really don't use black at all, and so you need colors for this paint to go over. So here I'm going against tradition and seeing how to use a black ground with these colors. That last color was Interference Gold, and this is Interference Copper. If you're interested in seeing that other video, I'll put a link up above, and it really is helpful if you want to start with the interference colors on white paper. So now I thought, what's the purpose of this black ground? When you can just use black gesso and then use an acrylic luminescent paint over the top, why bother with the watercolor ground? So I decided to do 4 small experiments with watercolors and see how it turns out, using watercolor washes and watercolor textures to see if it really works. So this first one, I actually tinted the square or the rectangle with an ultramarine blue just to see if it would make any difference on the black. The second square, I'm putting in some Interference Lilac and adding a little salt to see if the salt will create that interesting crystallized effect that it does on regular paper. The third rectangle, I thought I would see if the interference colors blend very well on a watercolor wash. And so this is Wet in Wet on the black with 2 interference colors and mixing them together in the middle. The fourth rectangle, I'm just putting a wet on dry wash, and then I'll try another effect over the top. Now on the first rectangle where I put the blue wash, you don't see a lot of that blue. It just left most of the black. I think if you used more pigment in that blue, possibly you'd see a little bit of a blue tint to it. And in another video that I'm going to post soon, which is using the black absorbent ground with watercolors and gouache, you'll actually see what those colors look like over the black if you use a little more paint. This one is pretty unimpressive. You don't see the blue hardly at all. But I'm going to try some masking fluid over the top and then another wash and see how that turns out. Now this is really interesting to me because usually when you use a masking fluid, you're trying to leave white. But in this case, obviously, you're going to have the black show through when you take that masking fluid off, which to me seems like that'll be an interesting look, an interesting effect that would be fun to use in different artworks. So one thing I came across with the masking fluid is as it dries, you don't see it quite as well, and you see that black through. So I put it on really, really thick just to make sure that I had good coverage. Now here's where that salt was. You could see that it did crystallize and you do get that salt effect. So that's one watercolor effect that you can definitely use with the luminescent paints over black. And it even shimmers a little more, I think, with that texture. So now here the masking fluid is dried and I'm going to put another wash over the top. And I thought it would be fun to do a two-tone wash, so I'm using the blue and the lilac together, mixing them together on the page while they're still wet. And we'll see how that turns out. Now back to my blue rectangle. I really want to try something that I enjoy doing with watercolor paint on regular paper, and that's using plastic wrap to make an interesting texture over the top. So I'm putting silver and lilac over the top into a wet on wet wash and scrunching up some plastic wrap and pressing it down real well and just letting that dry. So now I'm going to take some violet paint, just plain watercolor paint, and try painting over the top of this wash on the left just to see how that works. And mainly it seems like it's just kind of picking up the layer below, and not a lot of that purple is showing through, although you could try going over it again with another layer and just see what that does. Or you could do a layer of iridescent paint like the gold. Now this is dried, so I'm taking the plastic wrap off, and that made a really interesting sharp pattern on there. I love what the silver did. Now removing the masking tape, and something that really stands out to me is that the masking tape did not work as well on the absorbent ground as it did on regular paper. It doesn't give you as clean of an edge. So if you're going to use that, you might want to use the real masking tape instead of blue because it sticks better. The blue I use so that it doesn't tear the paper when I pull it off, but that's not a problem here. And you do want it to stick to give you a better edge. So now just removing that masking fluid from the top design here. And how interesting that it shows that black through. It really masked well. And Daniel Smith says this works really well with masking fluid, and they're right, it works really nicely. So if you want a sharp-edged design or detail left and have that black show through, that really works well. So now just try to see if I can lift some of this luminescent paint off the edges and how that works. And it works, okay. I think I would probably let it dry and paint more of the absorbent ground over the top, or use some black gesso or black paint over the top just to clean up those edges. So I hope you enjoyed experimenting with me with the luminescent paint on black watercolor ground. And if you're interested in another video about black watercolor ground along with gouache and regular watercolor paint, please click on the link above. And now don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and stop by and check out my webpage, my Facebook page, or take a look at my Instagram account if you'd like to learn more about me, my art, and my children's book illustrations.